And we're back. I know it kind of sounds like a monster. And we're back. It's COMP125, and it's summer 2016 semester, week 2, part 2 of our broadcast for client-side web development. And yes, the comments are that sometimes audio is wanky. It goes and kind of, you know, wanks in and out. And it's because the connection here on the internet connection. I do have things recorded at the same time as a backup, and sometimes what I'll do is if it's really bad, if you guys tell me it's really, really bad, I'll put up another version that says recording as opposed to broadcast. Notice, so this is broadcast. I have recordings of everything too. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. If I go to movies, I have a bunch of recordings for all my lectures last week, so I could always put them up, and they're perfect. Like I can't do it at the same time. I don't have time to do post-production. Remember, I'm just doing this as a service for you guys, right? So if it was fast and I could do it like right now, I would. But it's not fast. It takes time. Each one takes about 15 minutes to upload here at home, at school. At home, it'll take an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half. Because of the size, because like gigs of data that I'm uploading to YouTube, as well as I have to code it so it says the same stuff. COMP125 lesson 2 part 2 recording. I got to go through that whole process for each one. So if I have 10 of them, we're talking about hours of transcoding and stuff like this at home, and I like to try and do it here, but even with that, it's really hard to do. So I only do it when it's required. If something broke, like somehow our connection broke, then I'll put up the recording, right? Okay, but thank you for that comment. So, and feedback. So what we want to do now is talk about some of the stuff we covered last day. We covered most of this, right? We talked about some history about JavaScript. I'm not going to go over basics. You need to know the HTML like I talked about last time. And we talked about how to create basic HTML documents and some basic editors. And again, I recommend Visual Studio Code for Windows and Mac, or Brackets. Another really good contender is Atom. I think the Atom text editor is really cool too. Things we didn't get to last time. I'm going to keep going. We talked about client server and the idea that you make a request and you get a response, right, from everything else. These are all up on your notes inside your PowerPoint presentation. I'm not going to go over all this stuff because it doesn't make any sense. But here's some terminology for you that's up on. You can read this up on your PowerPoint. Difference between object, procedures, and methods. Again, method is almost like a function that's associated with a class or an object. Okay, whereas a function itself isn't associated. It could be something that's not associated with a class or an object. Yes. Bootstrap, I will, yes, eventually, not today. Probably next day, right? So we have to talk about how to get it, and how to install it, and everything else, right? Okay. And there's some really cool things and bad things. Here's one thing I never want you to do. See this document.write? All over your book, everywhere, it says document.write, document.write. Document.write is probably the worst thing you can possibly do on a web page, all right? And the reason for that is it completely wipes out the web page and puts in some data just from JavaScript. This is really bad. Yes. It's a great way of testing. If you want to test out JavaScript, that's the purpose of it, right? It's not really used in real web development. Document.write, we use console.log, right? Even alerts, you can do an alert. That's also bad. An alert is bad form because it pops up a modal window that you have to click away for you to continue. Imagine if you're going to a website and every time you move somewhere, alert pops up, alert pops up. It's really annoying. I'm never going to go back to that website again. It's like me waiting in line. I never want to do that again, right? So we don't do alerts typically. I'm just telling you now, for form, we never do alerts, and we never use document.write, ever, ever, ever. Even though it says it in your book, please don't do it. Okay, it's bad form. So here, instead of document.write, replace document.write with console.log, or we're going to use another way of accessing the DOM today, the document object model, where we can link to it directly, okay? Here's the way. Let's go back to our console, our form. I'm here in Visual Studio now, and I want to add some information into my paragraph, right, with JavaScript. This is going to satisfy some of your assignment criteria, right here, right? There's two things I need to do. In order for me to inject content into or interact with my page, I need to create what I like to call a hook, some way of clamping onto the page, right? Connecting, or making a reference, if you will, between your JavaScript logic and your HTML page. You need to do this. And I'm going to test you on this, right? So you need to do one thing. I say if I make a paragraph tag, here's the shorthand, with pound, which is an ID, paragraph with an ID of first paragraph. And if I press tab, it's going to look like this, right? So even if you type it by hand, paragraph with an ID of first paragraph. Remember we talked about last day? We don't use IDs for styling. We use IDs for this kind of stuff. For navigation, we use IDs for scripting, yes. Yes. Right, so if you notice that PID, paragraph, ID of first paragraph, if I was going to do it on Visual Studio Code, it'd be the same. So if I'll show you that again one time. So paragraph with an ID of first paragraph. ID is hashtag. Class is dot. Okay, that's the shortcut. And by the way, if you want to get a list of shortcuts and how it works, take a look at up online. You can look at Emmet. If I look at Emmet, right, for the shortcut for Visual Studio Code. If you look at documentation for Emmet, right, or cheat sheets, there's some cheat sheets as well. Let me go back. Here's some cheat sheets for Emmet. You can see that when it comes up, Emmet has a bunch of cheat sheets. Like, for example, nav greater than UL, U greater than UI creates this. And here's all the cheat sheets for Emmet, how to do stuff really quickly. And they have a bunch of different documentation for Emmet's amazing. If you actually look through this, it's perfect, and it works exactly the same, pretty much, with Zen coding in Visual Studio, right? If you've got Visual Studio Web Essentials installed, you don't have Visual Studio Web Essentials installed for Visual Studio, it will not work. Okay, let's go back. So I'm back into this, and I've got this first paragraph, but I want to hook into it somehow. Well, remember that there's something called, this whole document is actually an object. I want you to think about this whole document as an object. The document itself, which starts off at the top, the doc type, right? It's made up of a bunch of nodes we talked about before, right? The first one being the HTML node, which is this whole piece right here. This whole piece is the HTML node. And it creates, it's the parent node. And it creates two children, right? Two children here. The head and the body. These are the two children that are inside the HTML parent. They're pregnant. They're inside the HTML parent is pregnant with two children. They're not twins, okay? And inside the head has a bunch of children here, 4 children pregnant inside of itself, right? I'm sorry to say it that way so you guys get it, right? That's why I'm using the words, not because I want to make you mad or anything. It's because I want you to understand that they're inside, they're nested inside the other thing. That's the proper term, okay? But if you look at this, if I want to hook onto this, there's many ways I can do it. I can say something like, in CSS, I would say something like P hashtag first paragraph, or first paragraph if I wanted to style this thing, right? Well, it's similar like that in JavaScript. So here's JavaScript. We create variables in JavaScript. The following are the proper, types for JavaScript. Even though JavaScript is loosely typed and not strictly typed like C# and Java, so there's no explicit typing in JavaScript. I can't say, var my variable is equal to a string, or var my variable is an integer, or whatever. I don't do that. I just assign it a value, right? My variable. By the way, variables all have to be case sensitive. They're all case sensitive. So, and they cannot start with a number. All right. They all have to start with a some kind of symbol or a letter, both uppercase and lowercase. And there are some restricted symbols and everything else. If you look up at the PowerPoint from today, or last week, it'll tell you there's certain things you can't use for variable names. And there's some restricted words like we used last time. We used number by accident last time. That is actually a reserved word, and that's why it wouldn't work. Yes. Relationship? Yes and no. We'll talk about that later. So variable is the var is the keyword for variable creation. Remember last time? And then the next piece is we need to create a variable. I'm going to call it the same name as my ID. First paragraph. Let's just do that. First paragraph. And I'm going to use something called camel casing, and you guys have heard this probably before with C#, right? Where the first word in the variable is lowercase and the second word is uppercase. We're going to use the same structure here. And I expect you to do that with your assignments and your exams, okay? And I'm going to say equals to, we're going to assign it to, and here's something new. Watch this. The document model, we're going to access the document model. So we're looking at the whole document when I say document, okay? There's also the window. I'm not looking at the window. I'm looking at the document. There's window and document, there's other ones. Document is the main one. If I click dot, so I'm looking at the document object and I'm looking for a property or a method of the document object. And the method that I'm going to call up is get element by ID. So get element by ID. If you look at it, it gives you good good code hinting here. And then I'm going to talk about what the ID is that I'm looking for, which is, what's the ID that I'm looking for to hook into? First paragraph, right? Once I've done this, just like this, my first paragraph now is the HTML element. Look what it says in Visual Studio Code here. It's very good. It says that, which is first paragraph and then colon and then HTML element. That means that now first paragraph is considered like an HTML element, which means I can do anything to this that I would normally do to other HTML elements. Okay, let's do the same thing in Visual Studio really quickly. So here's my Visual Studio. I've got my paragraph. I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer. I'm going to go back to my app.js, and we'll do the same thing. I'm going to do a little bit quicker now, right? So var first paragraph is equal to document. Let's see how it gives it to me. Document dot get element by ID, and then it's first paragraph, right? It's got to be exact. It can't be. You can't be approximate. That whatever you put inside the quotation marks has to be exactly matching the stuff you're hooking into on the HTML page. So now I've got a reference. If I hover over this now, you can see that there's nothing. Look, I don't got nothing when I hover over this in Visual Studio. This is why I like Visual Studio Code better, because it gives me more code hinting than Visual Studio does when it comes to JavaScript. Look, if I hover over this, what does it give me? Nothing. If I hover over this one, what does it give me? It tells me what it is. It's an HTML element. And that's what I want you to think of it as, right? Okay, let's back on Visual Studio Code. I want to look at something called the inner HTML, right? The inner HTML of my first paragraph. Think about parent-child relationships now. Let's go back to my index.html. Take a look at this. My paragraph element, right, has potentially a child if there's something between it, right? Is there anything inside this element right now? No. Doesn't mean that there's no child. It's actually invisible. It exists, but it doesn't, there's nothing in it, right? There's actually, if I want to inject something in there, I can use two ways of doing it. One is inner HTML, which means the HTML that's contained within my paragraph. Right now, there's nothing, right? That's how I access it. It's the property of every HTML element, something called inner HTML. That's one. Here's the other one. And if you don't know what they are, if you forgot, this is why Visual Studio Code's awesome. If I go first paragraph now, dot, take a look at all the stuff I get. This is all the code hinting I'm getting here for first paragraph. Attributes, child nodes, children, client width, contains, right? All kinds of stuff here, right? That is inside my element. Inner HTML, inner text, that's different. What's the difference between, what would you think the difference would be between inner HTML and inner text? Anybody? Text is just text. If I inject HTML, I can inject tags as well. Paragraph tags, H1 tags, form tags. I can create my entire HTML document right from this little link right here, right? That's the difference between inner HTML and inner text. Okay, what else is there? Keep going down. Language, last child, local name. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. And if I type in something like content, right? What about content, right? So if I start typing content, you can see that there's going to try and match up with something else. For example, text content. Text content, right? I can use this. Text content. Let's use this for a second. Look how it formats it automatically for me. Let's try in Visual Studio and see if it's smart enough. Hold on. First paragraph, dot. And then if I go text content, it's there, right? Smart enough. It just doesn't give you the right code hinting right away. All right, so it does do it. You can, and you can do the same thing with Visual Studio Code. So let's go back. So if I was to, so if you go, but they're both good for different reasons, right? Like remember, Visual Studio is the big daddy of Visual Studio Code. It's like Visual Studio is like I said, 80 million lines of code. It better be better, right? It's got to be better, right? Okay, so how do I want to assign some stuff? Let's put in there my own content. Like I'll put it in quotations. My text content is going to be, it's alive, right? Alive, right? It's alive, just like the horror movies. It's alive. Let's do the same thing for Visual Studio itself. It's alive, right? Okay, let's check this out. Let's test this thing, man, and see if it works. So first paragraph, what am I doing here? I'm saying get the text content, replace the text content. That's what I'm really saying. Listen to my words here because it's important for the future. Replace the text content inside my paragraph that has an ID of first paragraph. That's what I'm saying, because this is where I'm getting this get element by ID. I'm creating a reference, right? Create a reference to a p tag, a p element, paragraph element, with an ID of first paragraph. That's what I'm doing. I'm creating a reference, right? When I create this reference, I can treat that variable as if it is that paragraph. Okay, that's what I want you. I want you to see them as interchangeable. My first paragraph ID, my first paragraph variable is exactly the same as accessing that actual paragraph, that paragraph itself. That's what I want you to think of it as for a second. It's not quite like that, but I want you to think about it. Imagine it as if it's like that. Okay, cool. If this works, I'm going to check it out. I'm going to right click, and I want to reveal in Finder or reveal in Explorer here, and I double click on my index.html to bring up my page, right? It's alive, right? Comes in there. Let's take a look at what I see, right? From view source. What is it actually doing? Right click, and I want to go view page source, and then notice that inside there, here's my paragraph tag. Do you see it's alive in here? No, it's not physically in here, but it gets there. Let's do it on this side. Let's right click. I'm just going to run this thing, right? In Chrome. So full run with debugging, right? Let's see if it works. And this is right up on, using Visual Studio with IIS in the background. Are you good with all this stuff? Some of you may already know this, and if you do, forgive me for being so slow, right? I'm going very slow. But the reason I'm going very slow is because I want each of you to understand how to link or hook into your index.html page. If you don't know how to do this, guys and girls, it's alive, then you have a problem, right? Let's right click and go to view page source, right? You like that, eh? And then see that there's nothing there, right? There's nothing there, right? So it doesn't actually show it, but it injects it. This is what I want you to do when it comes to your assignment number 1. I want you to take strings, like I've created a string variable instead, and I want you to assign them with a bunch of data, and we're going to inject it into the page, right? Very simple. You actually have the answers for assignment number 1 as is right now, if you think about it really carefully. Okay, who is not able to do that somehow? Okay, then we have to talk about this problem later on. If there's not working, there might be something you're doing wrong. Either your app.js is not linked in properly, or you made a mistake in typing the terms there. And I'm going to, just to make it easy for you, I'm going to push these changes up to GitHub so you can compare my code with your code. Let's do that. So I'm going to go to Team Explorer here. And I'm going to pin this. I'm going to go to Changes. And here are the changes in Visual Studio. I'm going to add these changes in. I'm going to say added simple code to app.js. We commit staged. And I'm going to go home and sync. And I'm going to push my changes. Push. And now in Visual Studio, it's going to be pushed. I'll do the same thing on the other side of the house. If you're a Visual Studio Code person, we'll do the same thing here, except we don't need to see this anymore. We'll do the same thing with Visual Studio Code, and we'll do it here inside this editor here. So I'm going to save this. And to prove to you that it's going to work, right, I'm going to go to here where it says GitHub. And notice that there's a couple changes. I'm going to stage these changes and add a little commit message saying added simple code to app.js. Click the check mark. and then go to the ellipses. This is the first time we're doing this. Go to the ellipses here in the editor, and go push. Right, she's going to push it right from Visual Studio Code right up to Azure, actually, at the end of the day, and GitHub. But just FYI, that you may have to log in here if you haven't set that up on the command line, and sometimes it's better just to go right-click and then open up in Terminal, and then when in Terminal View, do it from here. It's just better sometimes because it might give you some errors in Visual Studio Code if you haven't set up your command line properly. Okay, just let you know. Sure, here's draft.js. Any questions so far? All right, so this is it for today. We're gonna get back the next day and we're gonna do the rest, right? Because it's not gonna be so bad. So here's what we talked about today. We reviewed, which is gonna be on your test next day, progressive enhancement, and the idea that you need 3 levels of progressive enhancement, right? Your structure, your styling, and your behavior. All right, those are the 3 things you need, okay, in progressive enhancement. Next day, there's going to be a question on that, all right? I'm telling you. There's going to be stuff about this iffy. What is this thing? If I say this function, this structure, what is it? It's an immediately invoked function expression. It's also called an anonymous self-executing function or closure, whatever you want to call it, right? I'm also going to talk about this get element by ID stuff. Yeah. Structure, style, or presentation, and behavior. If you see style or presentation, they're kind of, I might put one or the other, and behavior will be for sure there. If I put it in your question, that'll be the answer. All right. So now, and here's another thing. When I create a reference, when I use get element by ID, I create a reference or a hook, right? So I'm doing a hook onto, right, my index.html elements, and then I can access them. I can actually modify them by using one of their properties, which is the text content property in this case, or the inner HTML property, or the inner text property, or many other properties. We're going to talk about how we can access. Once we've got access to the properties like this, I can play with that content any way I like. I can make a whole page if I want, all right? So, you know, just bear with me as we do this. This is the keys to use JavaScript on our page, okay? Other things we talked about are GitHub. Guaranteed there's going to be a question on GitHub. Microsoft Azure, whether you know how to use it or not, whether you can access it or not. I'm still going to ask a question about it, right? Visual Studio Code, I might have a question on that because we've talked about the editor. A little bit of Visual Studio, the differences between one and the other, right? Those kind of very simple things. And anything that's included in your PowerPoint number 1, which is week 1. Anything that's in here is good, is game for what I've talked about. If I've talked about it, or if it's in here, it's game. Chances are I won't talk about it if it's some kind of history or something like that. It's got to be something we've discussed. If I've discussed it with you, it's game for the little test. The test is going to be 5 to 7 questions from a pool of 20 or whatever, or something like that you guys can all share. Any questions before we depart for the day? Yes. Get something else. So we'll talk about that separately. Yes. Yes, you have to do that. You have to send them a note. Yeah, you have to send them a note. So that's something separate. So guys, if there's no other questions about today's lesson, then I'll see you next day, and we'll start off with a short test. Okay, a short little quiz for 2% of your final mark. Let me just stop this recording, and then we'll go off and see if I can answer some questions.